Hi, and welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet, a weekly program providing you with the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne. Coming up, with the recent rise of monkeypox cases, there has also been raising concerns surrounding the link to the LGBTQ community. Joining me now to discuss the stigma and the social impact monkeypox is having on the people of this community is Director of Trans Initiatives from Destination Tomorrow. How can we protect the members of this community from the stigma of this outbreak? Then there are more than 8.3 million people in New York City, and 1 in every 106 New Yorkers is homeless. There are men, women, and even children that sleep on the streets of New York City every night. Independent activist Shams Dabaron, a.k.a. the homeless hero, joined me to discuss his fight with city officials to fix New York City shelters. What can our city do to help support and improve the lives of the homeless community? After that, a state law was signed into effect by New York Governor Kathy Hochul that now allows speed cameras to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This new law is expected to help reduce the number of reckless driving incidents in New York City. Joining me to discuss the new law and the effect this will have on New York City street safety is Bronx and Uptown organizer for Transportation Alternatives. Will having 24/7 street cameras help make New York City streets safer? And finally, first starting out as a meal delivery service, Wrap for Bronx has grown into a substantial operator in New York City food relief space and a resourceful organization for communities to get access to services and help them build sustainably healthy futures. The director of Wrap for Bronx joins me to tell me more about their services. So please stick around. Open BxRx Tuesday starts now. Welcome to Open BxRx Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. As monkeypox cases continue to rise throughout the country, members of the LGBTQ community continue to face high risk. Joining me to discuss stigma and the social impact the monkeypox virus can have on members of the LGBTQ community is Director of Trans Initiatives for Destination Tomorrow, Mimi Shelton. Mimi, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Yeah, so now, what was your initial reaction when you saw that monkeypox was being linked to members of the LGBTQ community?
Initially, as a person who is both a scholar of LGBTQ history as well as a person who lives as a trans woman, I was afraid, to be honest with you. I I remember watching, I believe it was CNN, a clip. Um, how far back? I think it was June, maybe May. And I distinctly remember them talking about monkeypox, and then the next statement they made, like me talking about what the actual symptoms were, and the next statement they made said something to the effect of, "We're looking and noticing that this virus is being found more among gay men who engage in higher rates or higher or riskier sex practices." And immediately, my mind went straight to the AIDS epidemic of the 1980s, 1990s, and the early 2000s, and looking at the ways in which stigma and scapegoating led to a lack of access for healthcare support and also community support for LGBTQ individuals impacted by the HIV virus, AIDS virus as well. So initially, my thoughts about the linkage between the LGBT community, particularly gay, bisexual, and pansexual men, and orthopox, better known as monkeypox, was essentially here we go again with the labeling, scapegoating, and stigma rather than focusing attention on the medical issue.
Now, do you think that's why there has been a lot of mixed responses, you know, in the LGBTQ plus community when it comes to, outreach regarding monkeypox? Because I know online there are some people who are saying, well, we need to talk about this, and this is something that we need to talk about. However, some people may be afraid, like you said, that this stigma is going to follow them around. So, do you think that's why there has been this mixed response?
Absolutely. I think that when you're dealing with sexual identity as well as marginalization around gender identity, we as a community, and I speak for myself and I speak more broadly for the community, not in terms of generalization of personal experiences, but more so when it comes to a community based perception of something. Whenever it comes to sex practices, and disease, it can be a very fearful and triggering conversation for queer people, right? We learn very early on that who we are is disease, who we are is risky, who we are will lead to our own death and violence, and deservedly so, right? So therefore, it can be. I do believe, and I know that a lot of the mixed reviews among community has to do with not wanting to face stigma and not wanting to be labeled and classified as undeserving, as disease, because we all want to be accepted, right? And already we've seen such isolation during the pandemic, particularly around who we classify as a body that is diseased or sick or ill. And now the fact that that generalized discrimination is now falling directly on LGBTQ populations or on a medical issue, not a moral or political issue, is very disheartening. And it does lead to those mixed reviews, yes.
Now, I remember you telling me that you said that you had a friend who unfortunately thought or said to you, like, are we just more sexual than other communities? Can you explain how it's so dangerous that, people from this community internalize, what they're hearing about themselves, and what can be done to stop that?
Yeah, fascinating. Absolutely. So I did end up getting my monkeypox vaccine. I want to say a week ago now. And as I was getting it, I was there, as I told you, at Senator Gillibrand's town hall on August 1st. I was there getting my orthopox vaccine, and a friend and I, we happened to see each other, and one of his initial responses were like, "Are we just more sexual? Like, is it our fault?" And I have to tell him, don't believe the hype. And I tell other people, don't believe the hype. This virus, while it may be at this moment identified within the gay community and within LGBTQ communities, it does not mean, right? And I'm speaking with my bare minimum amount of scientific knowledge. So I'm sure that scientists who are still working to discover what the actual spread and infection rate of this virus is, right, and where it's found and among whom, I believe that we have to be very cautious about believing the hype that this is a moral issue, right? That we are engaging in higher and more riskier sex practices than our cis heterosexual counterparts. Because I can tell you, we're not. Just thinking about the typical cis heterosexual man in 2022, it's no different than any other time. We're all engaging in sex practices, or if we're not, we might be in that field that has nothing to do with, right, a random epidemic that has started up. So I think for me, when I think about the dangers, it's internalized hatred. It's the belief that you believe you're deserving of your own victimization, of your own death, of your own lack of access to care, because propaganda mixed with political isolation, mixed with scapegoating, leads us to believe that somehow we are more diseased, we are less worthy, right? And that we're deserving of being classified as such, right? And when we're working to fit in to different groups in society, it can be very difficult and very hard to now have to face another epidemic while already having the stigma and the discrimination of the HIV and AIDS epidemic in the back of our mind, historically speaking.
Now, how should leaders warn marginalized communities without causing misconceptions, about the virus as well as that community?
Yeah, so I think that's really two different ways of warning or educating, I would rather say. One is, I believe that government officials and institutional leaders need to work specifically with community based organizations, CBOs, such as Destination Tomorrow, in order to mediate and have a dialogue with communities within whatever locality you're in. And in mediating, what I mean is we in Destination Tomorrow understand the needs of the Bronx community, right? So we're best suited to be able to educate and make aware the communities that are most impacted by monkeypox, orthopox at this moment. Similarly, in any other locality of New York State or New York City, right, government officials, leaders need to be working with, tapping the shoulder of, and funding community-based organizations who do this work on a daily basis of anti-stigma work, of linking trans and queer people to accessing healthcare, mental health care, right, and the physical health care that they need, while also educating us on why testing and being having safer sex practices are so important. So that's one thing. Working with CBOs as a mediatory force to reach out to and touch base with the community. I think the second piece of awareness has to be actually getting educating ourselves and getting the full facts about what this virus is, how it's contracted, how it spreads, right? Because at the moment, the CDC is doing a subpar job at identifying the spread and the trace of this virus
Mhm.
because it has been so easy to scapegoat queer communities because people already believe we're diseased and we often internalize that same belief. Therefore, the first is mediatory forces of CBOs and leaning on them, but the second is get the science before you start classifying and scapegoating. Figure out the infection rate, figure out the spread, right? And if you do need to identify that population, find ways of doing it, right, that aren't so public, such as propaganda sources like media sources,
Do
news
you
sources.
think that do you think the propaganda could be deterring people from seeking help or even getting tested?
Absolutely, because the unfortunate reality of the 21st century is that so many people look to the television for their values and their morals, right? Unfortunately, because if we actually look to living life and reading and investigating our own selves, that'd be one thing. But unfortunately, we live in the 21st century where everyone looks to television, news, media sources, reality television for their values and their morals. So yes, I think that this propaganda absolutely leads to uh, a lack of wanting to get the vaccine. It impacted me, right? I didn't want to get the vaccine because I did not want to be classified as a man who has sex with men, which unfortunately WPATH and other medical services often classify trans women as men who have sex with men, right? And that is not something that I even want to begin to touch or go down. So it took me weeks, even months, to go and decide to get the vaccine and to educate myself because I didn't want that stigma on me because of what I knew was going on in news media. So if that's impacting someone like me, and I say a person who has a lot of fortitude, I can only imagine what it's doing to people who are much more vulnerable emotionally and fearful in terms of and unaware of how important your sexual health and accessing health care around your sexual health is important.
Now, I know your organization does a lot of work with that. Can you quickly let us know how people can stay up to date with Destination Tomorrow?
Absolutely. So you could always follow us on Instagram. That is at Destination Tomorrow 452. You can always follow us on Facebook. That is Destination Tomorrow. Sometimes it's Destination Tomorrow 1, but you can follow us on Destination Tomorrow on our Facebook page, our Twitter, which is Des Tomorrow. And as well, you can visit our website, www.destinationtomorrow.org, for more information. We are a holistic wraparound service agency. We offer case management, funding sources. We offer educational enrichment, which includes job readiness, the high school diploma acquisition, and programs. So come out, see us. We're also, and I want to let everyone know, We have guaranteed appointments right now for the orthopox monkeypox vaccine. Please reach out to us if you need those appointments. Until Friday, August the 12th, even though I know this airs later, we will be offering a mobile unit appointment as well on site. So reach out to us at 646-723-3325 or email anyone of us at info@destinationtomorrow.org to find out more information about that.
All right, Mimi, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me and take care.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. Across the country, now more than ever, many Americans are facing homelessness. According to Bowery.org in New York City, 1 in 106 New Yorkers will become homeless. Joining me to discuss his efforts to address the issue of homelessness facing our city is activist Shams Dabaron, better known as the Homeless Hero. Shams, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, can you first let everybody know how you actually got involved in activism for, the homeless community?
I got involved basically just at the Lucerne Hotel during the pandemic in 2020. I originally didn't want to be known, or wasn't trying to be recognized, just as a person. But so I developed the homeless hero to basically hide. I didn't want to be retaliated against while living in a shelter. But I felt after seeing so many people ODing around me, dying, and just the lack of services for us, that I had to speak out. And this was before we moved into the hotel. But eventually, once we moved into the Lucerne Hotel on the Upper West Side, and the then mayor, Bill de Blasio, began what I call an assault on us and described us as being non acceptable, it propelled me to go public and to fight against that mayor and his desire to create trauma on top of trauma.
Now, as you mentioned, you've been very public about your experience, with homelessness. And according to an article from the New Yorker, at the age of 12, you were actually released from your group home. And I think it also shines a light on how vulnerable people can enter homelessness. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah, basically, I had started to experience almost a group of foster kids since the age of 2. And at the age of 10, I started experiencing homelessness that I was not running away, but I was AWOL, staying out all night, and basically experienced not having a place for days on end. Uh, the group home I was in by the time I was 12, uh, decided that wherever I was staying at, I needed to go. I needed to go back there and basically discharge me from the entire system. And uh, without a safety net or anything. I really didn't have a place to go. And so I was basically thrust into the streets. And what it shows is, I mean, people are surprised when they hear that at that young age, I was aged out of foster care. But I don't know, I don't want to speak for today and how things are done today, but back then, obviously, it was a failure of the system, a failure of the city. You know, I was a child. I didn't, you know, I didn't. I was doing what I thought you know, as a hip hop person, and was doing parties. And this was the decision, and it negatively impacted my life in that I had to struggle to survive. You know, so there's a point where I descended into street life, and you know, during the crack epidemic, I became pretty big drug dealer, and you know, it was these are things that I didn't want to do. It was not the path that I was choosing for myself, but it was like out of necessity, I had to engage in that type of lifestyle. And unfortunately, you know, I eventually got out of it. I didn't go to jail or anything like that, but you know, in retrospect, it's like, damn, you know, I was an academic star. I was doing great things. Had I had the support system and had they continued to support me, it might have been better for me than, you know, lot of the struggles that I had to experience being a single parent and then an adult experiencing homelessness, a single adult experiencing homelessness.
Now, I really love that you brought up that you were doing well in school, because I think growing up for a lot of New York children or youth in New York City, they get told certain things like, well, you got to do good in school or you got to do these things, and I don't think people really talk about, there are so many other ways that you can end up, as somebody who is experiencing homelessness. Do you think our city, has failed, in that education regarding like how someone can become homeless?
Definitely. First of all, the narrative that's being projected is mostly led by white-led media, and even some of the white-led organizations are not great at being able to combat a lot of these negative stigmas and stereotypes. So when you see people saying "stop the sweeps" and centering that as the major issue of homelessness, what it does is it centers the image of a homeless person being in an encampment. And this is what we think homelessness is. You think homeless people are those that are on trains and subways and in the streets. And the reality is that's the smaller population of homeless people. So, what about the 14,000 children who are currently in shelters? They're not substance abusers. They're not mentally ill for the most part, and they are not. They didn't get homeless by not understanding financial literacy. There's 14,000 children that are in the shelters. How come there's no focus there on trying to get these children stabilized? These children are leaving shelters, and I raised a child from junior high school and throughout high school, his entire high school, in shelter, in a family shelter system. So I'm very much aware from the parent perspective of what that's like. But what are we doing to address that? What are we doing to show that the narrative will express that there's over 1,000 NYPD officers who leave shelters, who are housed insecure, that are going to work every day. There are thousands of city workers, HRA workers, who are in shelters, who leave a shelter to go to work. And so those are not the typical images that you're seeing on the news. And so there's something about narrative that we have to address in media. And that is one of the main reasons why you see or you hear that name, the homeless hero. You know, it was important for me to not present myself as a victim, as someone who is downtrodden and stuff. And I think my education serves me well in that I'm a avid reader. I'm knowledgeable about a variety of things,
Hmm.
and so I can quote Plato, I can quote Sun Tzu, I can talk about Rumi, and I can show you how our lives as homeless people are parallel to those heroes in many of our mythical stories. and stuff like that.
Now, I really want to know a little bit more about, how people who are dealing with homelessness were affected by the pandemic. I know it really took a toll on so many people living in shelters. So, can you tell us more about, just the citywide crisis with homelessness and how that was affected by the pandemic?
Well, like most things with the city when it engages homelessness, and I'm talking more for the previous administration under Bill de Blasio and others, they ignore the homeless population. And what they've created is this homeless shelter industrial complex. There's a lot of money in it, but in terms of the individual that is experiencing homelessness, they're not looked upon or treated as human beings. And that is from the moment you walk into a shelter. So during the pandemic, it was really the same way you saw the disparities and how marginalized communities were negatively impacted over other communities of people. Um, you saw that even more in the shelter. Case in point. So in during the height of the pandemic, I mean, when we saw the body packs, the trucks, when people were being buried in Potter's Fields, the mortality rate for people in shelters was 67% higher than the overall population of New York City. To show you the danger that we faced during that pandemic, during the height of the pandemic, that's how dangerous it was for us. It was 67% higher mortality rate for us, a higher mortality rate for us than the overall New York City population. And the mayor then still did not want to place us in single room, safer dwellings. He wanted to keep us in congregate settings, which caused unnecessary deaths. Like those, that the blood is on the mayor's hands. And when they quote a number that says, I think 120 something people have died,
Hmm.
you have to remember at the height, there was no way to determine who died from COVID unless you were in a shelter. The morgues were overwhelmed. So they were just taking people from their deathbeds and placing them in trucks and then putting them in Potter's Field.
I want to
So
touch on a little bit just about our current mayor, because you are getting support from Mayor Eric Adams, and you recently had a Homeless Rights Month sleep out. And I really want to talk about that. Can you tell us a little bit more just about the sleep out and, what was it like getting support from our current mayor, Mayor Eric Adams?
well, this is the big difference between this mayor and the previous mayor. And it didn't start when he took office. Obviously, he engaged me and allowed me to be a part of his transition team to help shape what would become of his administration, their policies. So when he took office, that relationship continued. And in most of what he is doing, especially addressing housing and homelessness, I'm included in those conversations. I'm very vocal, very impactful, and very instrumental. And it's not just me. I brought other homeless New Yorkers to be able to engage and help guide the city, but also to hold the city accountable. If these things are not being, if the things that we're bringing forth are not being addressed, and the difference between now and the previous mayor is basically I don't have to stand outside City Hall and yell and scream. I literally can call the mayor up and have a discussion with him, or I can go meet with them and have a discussion with them. So I respect and applaud this mayor because he came in saying, "I'm not going to ignore what is obviously a crisis. I'm going to do whatever I need to do because the mayor, according to the mayor, I don't know if I should say this, but his thing was that those people who are in those streets, those are my people. I have to do something to help these people. And Shams, I need all hands on deck. If you're going to help me, then help me. And if others want to help me, help me. And I'm seeing in real time how what we're bringing to the table in terms of advice and suggestions and stuff like that is being implemented and used to help address our issue.
So
Now,
I'm
are we
so
going to get out of this? One second,
mhm.
sorry. Are we going to get out of this overnight? No. Trust me, it's going to get worse before it gets better. It's going to get worse before it gets better. But we have to do something now.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing this information with us, and I definitely learned a lot. We have your social media on the screen so people can stay up to date with you. And once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday. Welcome back. New York City streets may become a lot safer after changes made to our roads. New York Governor Kathy Hochul signed state law allowing speed cameras to operate 24 hours a day, 7 days per week. Joining me to discuss the impact this will have on New York City streets is Bronx and Uptown organizer for transportation alternatives, Shawn Garcia. Shawn, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Now, could you first tell us about your organization?
Yeah, so Transportation Alternatives is a nearly 50-year-old transit equity organization that advocates for safer streets and creating alternatives of modes of transportation so that people can get around safely throughout the city, have better access to public transportation, bicycle lanes, that kind of infrastructure. But really, at the end of the day, creating a city that's working for people and making it safe to walk up and down the streets.
Now, as we know, the city expanded speed camera hours to be on 24/7. What were your initial thoughts when you heard the news?
Yeah, so this is something that we have been fighting for many years. I think a lot of people, when hearing the news, probably didn't realize that speed cameras weren't on 24/7, especially since, common sense says that most traffic crashes and most, deaths and violence related to traffic crashes are happening at night. It makes a lot of sense. So I think a lot of people were surprised that the news was something new and that it didn't already exist. We, as an advocacy organization, though, have been part of a statewide coalition pushing for this legislation. So we were very pleased when it came forward. And a lot of this work has been led by families who've been impacted by traffic crashes and who have lost children or loved ones to traffic violence. And they really have led this work, and we're so happy that they're able to celebrate this.
Now, I know for a lot of New Yorkers, myself included, we don't really drive or we rely on the MTA. So people may not know how severe traffic violence was prior to this change. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so currently we're experiencing one of the most deadly periods in New York City history around traffic violence. We're seeing people dying at very alarming rates, especially in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan. We're seeing some of the highest rates in 10 to 15 years. And traffic violence really, 4 out of 5 of deaths are occurring because of speeding, cars speeding on city streets. And so, many years ago, people might remember we had the reduction down to 25-mile-per-hour speed limit, which definitely was a step in the right direction. But many people haven't been respecting that 25 miles per hour and still speeding. And so with traffic cameras, we're able to see a reduction of speeding by nearly 70% citywide. And specifically, like in the Bronx on Grand Concourse, when we have speed cameras, we saw a reduction of speeding by 85%. So we know that speeding kills, and that speeding is the leading cause of injurious death for children in New York City. And we know that speed cameras are a big step in solving that.
So I'm hopeful as well. They can be a really big step towards solving this issue. However, following the 24-hour camera change, 2 pedestrians were killed from a car crash. Do you think the city may have overlooked some areas when it does come to street safety?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, this is just one of the pieces that needs to be set in motion to really start, dealing with traffic violence and trying to get to that Vision Zero goal that we've been speaking about for many years. Infrastructure is needed, especially in the most underserved communities like the Bronx, where we see the least amount of transportation infrastructure being developed, safe street infrastructure, bicycle lane infrastructure. We see the lowest rates happening in the Bronx and other outer boroughs. This definitely helps, but it's not going to be the only thing that helps in this crisis. I would say that with now the 24/7 speed cameras being in effect as of August 1st, we also want to see the expansion of speed cameras. We want to see speed cameras being in more neighborhoods, and this is really data driven implementation. The way that the city has been rolling out the speed cameras, they're doing it in school zones, they're doing it in areas where the most crashes are occurring. So that data-driven approach is really good, but we need to see more implementation and more investment, especially in our communities.
That's a really interesting point because I didn't think about, how many speed cameras are around and which neighborhoods they are. So I'm really glad that you brought that up. And you talked about infrastructure. Can you talk about that a little bit more for those who don't understand? Are you talking about just the way our roads are constructed? Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a little bit of everything. I mean, really, we want to make sure that we're creating infrastructure that is a design that's going to create more traffic calming conditions. So the Grand Concourse is a good example. It's been undergoing construction for many years now, and it's to this kind of goal of creating a safer intersection for people to get across. Grand Concourse has historically, of course, been one of the scariest and deadliest corridors in our borough. And now we're increasing the pedestrian islands in the middle of the road. Now we're reducing the amount of car lanes. Now we're increasing the service lane to be more adequate for busways, for bicycle paths. All these things create calmer conditions. The speed cameras are going to slow down cars, but really at the end of the day, the design is what really creates new habits for drivers and for pedestrians alike.
Now, could the 24/7 cameras also be the beginning towards decreasing hit and runs or even street racing, which is a pretty scary thing if you've ever been around that? Could this help with that as well?
Yeah, without a doubt, we're seeing many, again, most of the crashes that are resulting in death are happening, two-thirds of which are happening at night and on the weekends. And now we'll have cameras. Again, it was at 10 o'clock at night, the cameras were turning off until 6 o'clock in the morning. This is when all the street racing is happening. This is when many of the hit and runs are happening. So it's definitely going to help aid us in that effort.
Now, why do you think the city has finally decided to make some changes, especially, if organizations like your own have been advocating for this for a very long time?
Well, I think it's a combination of success on the advocates' part. Us really making a concerted effort, building a statewide coalition. Many of these things, unfortunately, are not decided on the city level, and there needs to be statewide approval and laws passed. So we've had a lot of success, and we have grown our ranks, and the advocacy has gotten stronger. And then there's also been some good support from the Department of Transportation and other elected officials who understand this crisis that we're in when it comes to traffic violence. and they're trying to aid us in that process as well. So I think it's a couple pieces coming together. We're definitely moving in the right direction, but we have so much more work to do.
Now, if a driver gets caught speeding, they will receive a $50 fine in the mail. Do you think this is enough to deter people from speeding?
So what the stats show is that people who get at least 2 tickets from the speed cameras, they're not going to be repeat offenders. They're not going to have a third speeding ticket. I think the percentage is close to 80 or 85% of folks. So we are seeing that they work. You get the fine, you get reminded that you were speeding. Some people maybe didn't realize they were speeding, and it's also important to note that the ticket is issued when you're 10 miles over the speed limit. So 35, 36 miles per hour is when you're getting that speeding ticket. It's going to take a while to get that cultural shift where we are creating a safer culture and we're not speeding around and we're, respecting each other on the road. But this is definitely going to help in creating those habits.
Now, as you mentioned, the cameras have decreased speeding by a little over 70% on average. How will this affect people who use alternative methods for traveling, like biking or scooters, which we have seen a lot of in recent times?
Yeah, without a doubt, we're in a bike boom here in New York City. It's obviously the direction we have to go with the climate crisis that we're facing. We need to see less cars on the streets, and we need to create alternative modes of transportation that are viable for everyone. So that's more efficient buses and public transportation. That's more efficient bicycle paths that can support, e-scooters and city bike and, people's personal bike usage. But also we need to see the design of our streets created so that there's efficiency for people to get from point A to point B. And a lot of spots here in the Bronx, we still live in places where we have to walk long corridors just to get across a highway. We have to wait for a bus that maybe arrives once or twice an hour. This is not creating that kind of culture that's going to be self-sufficient and good for our environment. So, this implementation of the speed cameras and the infrastructure that we're calling for is what's going to move us in that direction.
Now, you have several campaigns advocating for the reclaiming of New York City streets. Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, so our big effort right now is what we're calling 25 by 25. So we're setting this goal to reclaim 25% of New York City streets by 2025 to service pedestrians, cyclists, and other folks who might be not driving cars. Right now, we live in a society that a lot of our street space is dedicated to driving, to parking, to access to highways. While, like you said earlier, most of us are not drivers. By and large, especially in the Bronx, we're closer to 70, 80% folks using public transportation, low car ownership. So we need to make streets that are really servicing the people that live in the communities that the streets are located. And it's not an easy thing. Reclaiming streets is something that people have to learn to look at a street in a different way. They have to know that this corridor can be shut down on a weekend so that kids can play and they can have access to an open street. We need to have, open restaurants programs, getting the aid and support of the city so that they can flourish and really become viable for folks. And we need to create real forms of transportation that people feel like they can rely on. The more people can rely on public transportation or taking their bike to work, the more people will do it. It's going to be more cost effective, safer, and it's better for the environment.
Now, how can people stay up to date with your organization?
You can head over to our website, trans.org. We do campaigns all over the city, like you were saying. We have a bunch of campaigns happening in the Bronx and Upper Manhattan, some that range from creating a bicycle lane on a corridor or supporting the expansion of an open street near a school. So there's so many different ways to get involved. We are a community-based organization. Our volunteers are all from the community, are speaking about the issues in their community, and we're supporting them in their efforts. So if you're concerned about street safety in your community, or if you want to see expansion of different kind of infrastructure, we want to support you. So reach out to us.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be right back with more Open BxRx Tuesday.
We built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at bronxnet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. With a mission to address food insecurity, organization Rap for Bronx provides services and opportunities to create sustainable, healthy futures for Bronx residents. Joining me to further discuss their effort is Director for Rap for Bronx, Shana McCormick. Shana, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Kibin.
Now, can you tell me about your organization, Rap for Bronx?
Sure. So Rap for Bronx is the relief access program for the Bronx. And we were formed during March of 2020, during the height of the pandemic, as a direct response to the sharp rise in food insecurity. And we currently serve about 45 community-based organizations, ranging from faith-based organizations to men's, women, family shelters, senior centers, and NYCHA developments as well. And we distribute prepared meals, grocery items, and also New York State fresh produce.
Now, can you tell us how your organization actually began?
Absolutely. So we started, Rap for Bronx was formed through a group of individuals that formed a task force, and we all came from different restoration and construction companies as a part of one company, or one group of companies rather. And so we had a lot of unique resources that we could tap into, such as fleet. So we had trucks and vehicles to utilize when the city was shut down. And we also had laborers that were laid off and in need of work. So we identified through some partners and people that we knew in the Bronx the need for last mile delivery and for food assistance. And so we thankfully had the fleet and the drivers to be able to help fill that gap. So we all got together, we had this task force, we connected with different community boards in the Bronx, some other pantries, and we started serving anywhere between 10 to 12 CBOs, community-based organizations, in the very beginning of the pandemic. And then it just really grew from there, but we really were able to tap into some amazing resources to help us fill those gaps.
Now, can you actually tell me what was it like working through the pandemic? I know that was a really rough time for people who were struggling with, getting access to food.
Yes, it's really hard to describe it in words, to be honest, but I have to say, there's usually always a negative connotation to the pandemic, which rightfully so, but working during the pandemic and on the ground really helped restore my hope in humanity. We had a lot of amazing volunteers and people on the ground helping to fill in these gaps and take care of each other and take care of our neighbors in need. And also taking care of each other in the sense when we were feeling burnt out from volunteer fatigue, et cetera. But working during the pandemic was nonstop. It was 24/7. We were awaiting phone calls for donations and trying to orchestrate deliveries, the logistics part, and then organizing volunteers, getting deliveries and trailer loads of food, and then trying to break that down and further the distribution. There was a lot of lessons learned, but it was also a great experience working with and meeting so many amazing people in this space, in this food relief space as well.
And I feel like I can understand what you mean, because I know for during the pandemic, we did see so much, just people being a really good neighbor. And we saw food pantries, more food pantries, community fridges. So I definitely understand what you mean. Just by seeing that, it was kind of a good thing to see, despite, so much, despite being in a dark time. Now, your organization started off delivering meals and groceries, but you've grown to support the community in other ways. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so we still have a very robust distribution program going, obviously. So as I mentioned, we have 45 community-based organizations that we deliver to weekly. So we're reaching about 5,000 individuals a week. And, through the relationships that we've built with the community members, community leaders, we know that, access is a real issue, access to healthy food. So we've tried our best to focus on nutrition education, partnering up with some other organizations like the Sylvia Center, providing free virtual cooking classes for families to tap into. So we work with them. We'll provide a meal kit. So it has all the ingredients that one could need to carry out the recipe. And then they can get online and join in and cook as a family in the comfort of their own homes and learn more about healthier eating, healthier options. And we also have our farmers markets to help improve access and engage the community. We engage local chefs to help cook up a meal, utilizing the goods that are at the market. So we really have a focus on not just distributing the goods, but also educating and providing access to healthier goods in the Bronx, which we all know is the unhealthiest county in our state, unfortunately. And I think it's organizations like ours and others that are doing the good work that are really working to help change that.
Now, I think education is so important in this, and unfortunately, I do feel that a lot of people who are struggling may not even know that they're struggling with food insecurity. Can you tell us more about what food insecurity is, and how can someone know that they may be living in an area that's affected by it?
Sure. So there are different levels of food. You can be food insecure in the sense that you really genuinely don't know where your next meal is coming from. You're living in extreme poverty, you don't have the resources or the wherewithal to get your next meal. Then there's also, food swamps and food deserts that are directly related to food insecurity, where, individuals may be residing in an area that there's access to food, but it's all fast food. It's unhealthy. There's not access to fresh, nutrient-dense goods. And so that then relates to the health of that immediate area. There's many, many pockets and neighborhoods throughout our whole entire city, but especially in the Bronx, that are considered food deserts, where there's not access to certain, to foods, or food swamps even, where there's plenty of food around, but it's, fried chicken, or it's, not to say fried chicken's bad, but if that's the only option that you have and you don't have the option to access nutrient-dense goods, you're considered to be in a food swamp. So there's different levels to food insecurity, but mostly, this city, our city, New York City, 1 in 4 children doesn't know where their next meal is coming from, and that's just not acceptable.
Now, I want to know your opinion. How do you think, just inflation or the rising cost of food, how has that actually made things harder for your organization as well as people, in the Bronx?
Definitely. So we have seen, and that's a great question, because we really have seen over the past couple of months a sharp rise in the need. Whereas, during the height of the pandemic, obviously the need was extremely great. And then thankfully, about a year after the pandemic, we were able to see some of the need decline and reduce rather. So, the lines were not as long at a certain point. I would say maybe September 2021 and then into the end of 2021. And then as of the beginning of 2022, with inflation, and also we have more individuals coming into our city that need our care and need access to food as well. Both of those things combined, but specifically inflation, has really made it a little bit more difficult for households to, to figure out where their next meals are coming from or budget. Majority of those that we serve are also on a fixed income. So they're either, receiving benefits, SNAP benefits, and those benefits are set. Or they're seniors on a fixed income on Social Security, those benefits are set. So the cost of food is going up, the cost of living is going up, but the benefits that they're receiving are not lining up with that. And so it's making things a lot more difficult.
Now, your goal is to build bridges for communities to access sustainably healthy futures. Why is this so important to ensure healthy food is sustainable for Bronxites?
So it's definitely important for us to be able to sustain and provide sustainable access to healthier, nutrient-dense goods if we want to change the health outcomes for the borough of the Bronx. So continuously coming in as number 62, the last and unhealthiest county in our state, if we want to change those health outcomes, we have to ensure that there's a sustainable method in place to provide access along with education on healthier eating, healthier habits, if we really want to see those outcomes change. So it's really important for us to stay consistent and to provide sustainable ways of providing access to nutrients good for our community.
Now, I also love that your organization hosts farmers market pop-up events. I think they're so cute. I see them online all the time, and it's nice to have something like that in the Bronx. Can you tell us about that a little bit more?
Sure. So we have our free farmers markets that are held in conjunction with the Bronx River Alliance's free community paddles. Currently, they're being held at Starlight Park, which is off Sheridan. And that information can be found on our website and also on our Instagram, which I'm sure we'll give to you guys to share with the community. But it really started, I had a connection and conversations with one of the members from the Bronx River Alliance about a foodway that's nearby near Concrete Plant Park. We got to talking and I'm like, hey, you know, it'd be great to start a market. And he's like, I have the perfect location. So we set up our market there. So we have a couple of different items, New York State fresh produce that we bring down. And then we also have a local chef on site with us that will cook something up utilizing the goods that are on the table that are at the market. And sometimes we'll give out the recipes for the goods that are provided, but it's a really fun time for the community to come out. It's a free event. Kids love to come. You can take home some fresh produce. You can stop by and see the chef and taste what they're cooking up, learn a little bit about cooking, a little bit healthier if you want to give that a try, and just learn some new things, and then also get on the Bronx River and enjoy that paddle.
Now, I want to touch on something that's super important, and that's volunteer work. That's a huge part of your organization. Can you let everybody know what are the qualities that make a good volunteer for Rap for Bronx?
Dedication, dedication, and not being afraid of challenge. So we have had some really amazing volunteers come through our doors, especially during the height of the pandemic, and you know, us, like many other organizations and people on the ground, really didn't know what to expect. And so just, you know, always being ready and up for a challenge is one key quality that makes a good volunteer. But dedication, you know, you came to help serve. And so you're going to stay dedicated to see that mission and the task out for the day. And to have a really good attitude. You know, we love to spread and share positivity and love. And so we have a good time. We've had some really fun times in our warehouse, packing out pantry bags. And so, you know, the markets are a really great time, a lot of great community engagement. I feel like everybody gets to leave with a smile, a good bag of fresh veggies, something in there. It's a good time.
That's awesome. Now, how can people stay up to date with your organization?
So we can be visited. You can visit the website. So our website is www.rap4bronx.org. Or on Instagram, we're very active in posting what events are coming up. Any volunteer opportunities can also be found there. So our Instagram handle is rap4bronx, RAP4Bronx.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
That's all for our show today. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Kibin and Alleyne, wishing you and yours safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.